has been a wonderful guest and partner with us for a long time, especially sharing his unique insights on the F1 visa space or any kinds of visa, because of his background of in the industry for so long. So today's speaker, Travis, was a former U.S. consul, a former U.S. visa officer, and a current immigration attorney as well. So for today's session, a big news happened. I think everybody probably know about it, of H1 visa being frozen for a while and then come back. So a lot of new information, a lot of unpredictable rules are rolling in right now. So we thought it's better to invite an expert like Travis to give a presentation and then hopefully answer some live questions to us about the current trends that has been going on with the student visa. So for today's session, we'll be focusing on starting from the DS-160s, what will be the changes, what specifically should we pay close attention to, and then also with the current trends of social media vetting going on right now, how could you navigate your social media? How could you introduce your social media as a student? And then third would just be if somebody already has an F1 visa, for example, a lot of people that we know has an OPT status or are currently under day one CPT. What if they wanted to go back home? What would be the suggestions for them to renew their F1 visa? So at the end, at the second half of today's 1 hour session, we're gonna have a live Q&A sessions. We're taking in questions starting from now. So if you come in with the questions or throughout the presentation, you have a new questions, please don't hesitate to send them in the Q&A session down below. We will collect them and we will go one by one. Hopefully we can answer your questions. If we haven't got to your questions by the end of today, don't worry, you can always scan the QR code for WhatsApp or WeChat. You can connect with our consultants. We can forward Travis' contact information your way, or we can try to answer your questions if this is within our capacity. So just before we begin with the presentation, I just wanted to give a little bit more information about us as the host for today. So we are Go Leads. We're an education consultancy located in Los Angeles. Our primary services will be focusing on day one CPT university applications, and other consultations when it comes to F1 reinstatement, change of status, and stuff like that. So we are certified by IRC as one of the most respectful organization in America's educational space. And then just two things we have going on with our current campaigns. We're launching our Day One CPT communities where students can join, they can earn points, they can transfer those points into rewards. So we try to build up a platform for you to connect with fellow students. And another thing is that we'll also launch our forum so that you can have in-depth conversation, not limited to Day One CPT, but other stuff, for example, F1 visa, visa interviews, and stuff like that. And we are on Google reviews. So if you're interested, feel free to check us out. And we're on all social media platforms as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing from my end. And then I'll let Travis, you can introduce yourself and then begin with today's presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'll pull up a couple of slides here and we can get started. So first of all, as Ryan mentioned, I am a U.S. immigration attorney, but the point of this session is not for me to provide legal advice. I am going to try to give you some tips and insights as you navigate through your F1 visa journey. But if you have specific questions, please reach out to a qualified immigration attorney. Don't leave this to chance. My email address is below here if you want to reach out to me with any questions you have. So as Ryan mentioned, I used to be a visa officer. I was a career foreign service officer with our foreign ministry with the US State Department. And for most of my career with the State Department, I was, conducting visa interviews. I've interviewed tens of thousands of applicants from all over the world, many of whom were students. And I've also managed a visa operation, and I've even managed a fraud prevention team, which was tasked with investigating possible visa fraud. So I've brought my unique experience from, the other side of the visa window to my practice as an immigration lawyer to try to help people like you navigate through this really confusing and often scary process. And so today, I want to talk about some recent updates to the visa application journey. First of all, as Ryan mentioned, finally, new student visa interview appointments are being reopened. We were facing a pause that the State Department announced for several weeks, and we were all a little bit worried because there was no timeline about when we should expect everything to go back online. Well, finally, it is back online, but there are some updates and there are some new vetting and restrictions placed on the process. So I want to talk about that. Then I'll go through what you should expect and what you should think about if you are planning to renew your student visa. And finally, what you might consider if you're thinking about leaving the country to come back in before you finish your degree program or maybe your OPT work experience. And then I'll answer as many questions as we have time for. So I like to think about the student visa process in 5 steps. It really starts from, applying to a school, being accepted to a school. You'll get your I-20 form, or if you're a J student, you'll get your DS 2019 form. And from there, your visa application really begins. You fill out the online DS 160 form, you go in for your visa interview, hopefully you're approved, and then you travel to the United States. And unfortunately, we are seeing an increase in the number of students who are denied at their visa interview. Particularly for F applicants, we're seeing almost 1 in every 2 facing a denial or a lengthy delay, which for students might as well be a denial. And given the further restrictions that have been placed on students lately, we unfortunately expect that number to further increase. So what I want to do is give you some tips and some insights to help you navigate through this process so that hopefully you don't fall into that 41% of applicants who are denied. And I want to start with the DS 160 application form. I am totally aware that in many parts of the world, it is very common to hire an agent to fill out this form for you. And I don't blame you. The form is confusing, it's glitchy, it takes a long time. But I want to urge you, if you take nothing else away from this session, I want to urge you to do this yourself. Every response that you put into this form is essentially certified to be true, to be accurate, to be honest. And so if you pay somebody else to do this for you, there's no guarantee that they're going to be as scrupulous as you would be. Now, the one exception to that is if you do pay somebody to do this for you, at least make sure that you have an opportunity to review what they've provided in the responses. We do work with several organizations. I know Go Elite provides some of these services as well. They do an excellent job, but you have to have the opportunity to review this before it's submitted. Because again, any discrepancy between what's provided in the form and maybe what's true or what you discussed during your interview can lead to a refusal or even further complications. Now, the other tips that I would give for you here, check your answers before they're submitted. Once the form is submitted, you cannot change any responses, and you really can't even review what you've responded with after the form is submitted either. So if you're anything like me and you're prone to waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and saying, oh my gosh, what did I say in that one answer? You won't actually be able to review it unless you print your answers before you submit the form. So if you are working with an agent to help you with this form, make sure you have an opportunity to review everything before it's submitted, and make sure you save your responses before the form is submitted as well. Then as general tips, not every browser will work with the form, so we generally use Google Chrome, and we say save your progress often. It should take several hours, unfortunately, to complete this form. And it's not because there's anything that's, like brain surgery. It's just the form asks for a lot of details. And it may take you some time to gather the information that the form asks for. Thankfully, there is a tool to save your progress and then log back in. But remember that you only have 60 days to complete the form after you start it. And then the form is only valid 1 year after you submit it. So if you're really unlucky and you find that you can't schedule a visa interview for over 12 months after you submit the form, you may need to submit a new form. Fun stuff, I know. But let's go into some important questions on the form. And this is either if you're filling the form out yourself or at least reviewing what an agent has filled in for you. I want you to pay close attention to these questions. First, have you ever been refused before? Well, actually, before I go through these, let me tell you that your visa officer will know the answer to all of these questions already. And so we commonly refer to this process as really an exercise in trust. It's an exercise to see if you, the applicant, are willing to essentially come clean and admit or report the truth as it is. And so the first question here, have you ever been refused or denied a visa in the past? If you have to say yes. There's a yellow rectangle in the middle of the visa officer's screen that will immediately alert them if you've been refused before. So don't lie about it. Don't try to hide the fact. Just admit it. And when you're asked to explain it, don't try to guess at the reason why you were denied. Chances are good that your visa officer didn't tell you. And so simply say, yes, I was refused before. And then you might take that opportunity to provide some positive details about your situation. Similarly, if you have family in the United States, or if somebody has applied for a green card, an immigrant visa on your behalf or in your name, the visa officer already knows about this. So answer yes, provide the details requested. But then during the interview, my recommendation is that you focus on your plans and qualifications as a student. And then we'll talk a little bit about arrests in a moment. But arrests are now, and really any criminal issue, are now even more important than they used to be. I'm going to come back to this idea, but I want to remind you now that if you have any criminal history whatsoever in any country, please reach out to an immigration lawyer to evaluate what that might mean for your chance of success. Again, we'll come back to that in a moment. I want to talk about social media first, though. So the announcement that was made last week kind of dovetailed on a couple of announcements made previously that every student visa applicant will now be subjected to extensive social media review. And it's really not even just social media. It's a review of your entire online presence. And that begins with the DS-160 form. So there is a question that asks for all of the social media platforms that you either are using or that you have used within the last 5 years. And of course, there is a drop-down menu here. So if you have or are still using any of these social media platforms, you have to note them on the form. Every student that I've worked with who has had an interview in the past 2 or 3 weeks has all faced the exact same question, which is, did you list all of your social media accounts on your DS-160 form? And if they're not able to say yes, their applications are generally denied. So make sure, this is crucial when you fill out the form or when you review what somebody else has filled out for you. It's crucial that you list all of your social media accounts. And then for Facebook specifically, don't just list your name as the account handle or identifier. List the actual URL website address for your account homepage. That's because there may be more than one person with their name, Ryan Jong. And if the State Department can't pinpoint the actual Ryan Jong that is applying for the visa, you may encounter delays. Your interview may even be canceled. And then the most recent update to this is that the State Department is asking that all of your accounts be set to public. Previously, this was a bit of gray area. We weren't necessarily advising people to change any settings. But now it's clear that once you go in for your interview, your visa officer will ask you to set your accounts to public so that they can review everything. So it's a good idea to set them to public before you go in for your interview. And let's talk about how this works and what the department's actually looking for. So remember, I talked about the process in 5 general steps. Well, the updated process is now more intense. So after the visa interview, if your visa officer is inclined to approve your application, they're now required to place your application on pause, what's called commonly referred to as administrative processing or 221G. Now, legally, that's called a refusal, although I like to think of it as just like hitting the pause button. So they pause your application while they review your online presence. And so, what are they looking for? Well, they're looking for a lot of stuff. They're looking for, scary things like, are you showing support for a terrorist organization? Or is there evidence that maybe you have or you're intending to engage in some sort of illegal activities? And by the way, let me pause right here and remind you that criminal issues are important. If you have any posts or you've been tagged in a post or you've even liked a post that kind of shows that you are doing something illegal, you have done something illegal, or you maybe will do something illegal, that will be a problem. Remember that the visa officer will absolutely know if you have any criminal history in the United States already. They will maybe know if you have any criminal history from other countries as well. And then while they're looking through your social media, this will give them additional maybe cause for concern if you have, potentially problematic posts online. So pay attention to that. Beyond that, the government's looking for evidence of maybe hostility towards the US government, US citizens, maybe evidence that you are harassing Jews with anti-Semitic, rhetoric or behavior. And then the last two here are really just kind of what we've always been on the lookout for as visa officers, what visa officers are always looking for, which is there some evidence that you have violated a visa previously? Or is there evidence that maybe you're lying in your DS 160? Now, a couple of examples here. I was working with a client a couple months ago who had posted a post on Facebook that made it look as if she was working in the United States without authorization. But she absolutely was not. But her visa officer saw that post and ended up denying her application because they concluded that she had worked previously while she was on a student visa without obtaining the authorization to do so. So again, be careful what you post on social media. Be careful what your friends and family tag you in, because these types of posts could lead to the wrong conclusion, and they could bring some complications to your situation. So finally, back to the issue of arrests. Let me remind you again, if you have any criminal history, please talk to an immigration lawyer. But I also want to clarify something, and this is a common question we get, especially since this is more kind of in the spotlight than it used to be with these social media reviews. If you have ever been arrested in any country, it doesn't matter if charges were dropped, if a record was expunged. It doesn't matter if you've gone to your government and obtained a certificate saying that you have no criminal record. If you have ever been arrested or convicted for anything, you have to answer yes to this question. That's because in the world of visas, criminal issues don't ever go away. They're on your record permanently. It doesn't mean that you will be disqualified from obtaining a visa, but if you don't admit to this issue, you probably will be denied, and something more important may even happen, or more damaging may even happen as well. So treat this question seriously. Talk to an immigration lawyer if you think you might need to answer yes. So let's switch gears and let's talk about international travel. So first of all, I want to talk about renewing your student visa and maybe when is the best time to do so. So first of all, think of the student visa as a ticket that gets you into the country. The ticket is not valid forever, and it doesn't allow you to stay in the country forever. It gets you into the country as long as you're a student and you're maintaining your status. But the ticket is also only valid for a window of time. Could be 1 year, 3 years, 4 years, depending on your situation. And so once that ticket expires, once that visa expires, you have to apply for a new visa before you can come back into the country. Now, if you're in the country and you're maintaining your status and your visa expires, it has no effect on your status. But then if you leave the United States, you have to get a new visa before you can come back in. Because remember, it's your ticket into the country. And so that brings us to the question of when is the best time to think about renewing your visa? And let's assume that your visa is valid at least through your graduation date. So you're studying, you're maybe working in CPT, pre-completion OPT, you graduate, you're doing post-graduation or post-completion OPT. Maybe you even plan to go on the STEM OPT. When should you think about renewing your visa? Well, first of all, like I said, if you don't plan to leave the country, you don't need a new visa. However, that's risky because what if you have a family emergency or maybe an opportunity to travel for a conference or a school trip? If your visa has expired, well, now you might be stuck outside of the United States while you renew your visa. You may miss class, you may miss an exam, it may cause other issues. So I like to plan ahead. I like to be proactive and I like to think of, having a valid visa is something that's important. So my advice would be to think about renewing your visa before you graduate. Because after you graduate, although you are still arguably completely entitled to a student visa if you're, maintaining your status and working in an authorized OPT program, it can be more difficult because your visa officer is evaluating you as a student when you're applying for a student visa. So if you've already graduated, if you've already kind of completed your journey as a student, it can be conceptually more difficult to say, yes, this person deserves a student visa. So my advice generally would be consider renewing your visa if it's about to expire before you graduate, because now you're presenting yourself as an active, progressing, ongoing student, as opposed to somebody that's already completed their studies. When you do go back to renew your visa, make sure that you bring your transcripts and you're prepared to, explain what you're actually doing, what you're studying, when you're going to graduate, what you're planning to do after you graduate. And that will be a safer option, generally speaking, than waiting until after you graduate. Now, finally, I want to talk about international travel as well. So forgetting the idea of, that visa that you need to get back into the country, let's talk about what happens when you actually do come back to the country. Well, first of all, you have to bring your I-20 form, or if you're on a J visa, your 2019 form. And I would also recommend that you bring your transcripts as well. This is in case the Customs and Border Protection, or CBP official, has some questions about whether you're actually studying in the United States. With a student visa, again, it's primarily designed so that you can be a student. So they're going to be wondering if you're actively studying and maintaining your status as a student. So transcripts are a good way to kind of show that you are. If you have already graduated and you're engaged in OPT work, make sure you bring your work authorization as well as, an annotated I-20 form, because that will show again that you're maintaining your status. And then one other point to clarify here is that any electronic device that you have with you is subject to search. And this actually goes for American citizens as well. Nobody has any reasonable expectation of privacy at our country's borders. And what that means is if you have messages maybe in WeChat or WhatsApp or even text messages that maybe show that you're talking about trying to find a job without authorization, for example, that could severely complicate your life. So be careful what you're doing with your electronic devices, and remember that they are absolutely subject to search at the border. So at the visa interview, very quickly, just to kind of end on this, The interview is very short, usually 1 to 3 minutes long. That has not changed. The interview is still going exactly like it progressed last summer, the summer before that, the fall before that. There's always been scrutiny of your DS 160 to make sure that you're being honest. And remember, the officer can deny you for any reason at all if they're simply not convinced that you deserve a visa. Remember, the law is not really on your side. It's written against you, assuming that you don't deserve the visa until you explain to the officer why you qualify. So I want you to be prepared to, first of all, be honest above everything else, answer all the questions the officer asks as authentically and confidently as you can. But I would also urge you to be prepared to proactively volunteer details about your situation. Be ready to explain not only what school you're attending and what you're going to study, but why you chose that school, why you chose to obtain a certain degree, what this degree will unlock for you in the future, and of course, how you're going to pay for everything, what financial arrangements you've made. These are the key topics that your visa officer will want to explore. And the more proactively you can volunteer these details, the easier it will be for the officer to say yes. So think of this as an activity where you're essentially pulling the officer through your introduction and leading them to a positive decision. So I know that was a lot of information. If you're still interested in further insights, further guidance, great place to start outside of Go Elite, which is an amazing place for guidance, is our YouTube channel. We regularly post updates about how to explain your choice of school, your funding arrangements, what to do if you've been refused before. And then we also have in-depth guides that are available online at zfvisaguides.com. We have a course that is specifically around the DS 160, where we walk you step by step how to answer every question in the form honestly and accurately. We have a course that's dedicated to how to prepare for the visa interview itself. We have examples of good and bad interviews. We have an effective, proven method of communication that we teach. And then we have a complete end-to-end guide. It covers everything from the I-20 form through the interview and even your travel to the United States, how to avoid complications, and then how to handle those complications that maybe just aren't avoidable. And the complete course comes with a bi-weekly question and answer session that either myself or my partner Mandy will lead to answer any lingering questions that you have. And for everybody on this call, we're excited to offer you a 25% discount for our courses. Be sure that you write this down because you'll need to enter the coupon code GOELITEF1 when you go to checkout, and then you'll see that discount automatically applied. And if you do have specific legal questions, or you just simply want some one-on-one support to prepare for your interview, you can schedule a consultation with us at our law firm's website, zfvisa.com, or feel free to just send us an email and we'll give you an idea of, first of all, can we help? And then second of all, how we might help, and we can take it from there. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And Ryan, maybe we can open it up to Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Travis. Tons of helpful information. I'm sure that everybody in this call are curious and have some kind of questions. So if you do, we already see some questions coming in, but if you do have follow-up questions you want to ask, this is the time that you can input in the Q&A box down below to Zoom. But now just let me share my screen. I want to make sure everybody can see it. Can you see my screen, Travis?
I can.
Okay, let's just jump on from question number one. Question number one. So what new questions could we expect in the F1 visa renewal interview? Specifically, this person wanted to renew the F1 visa.
So I don't expect any new questions aside from have you listed all of your social media accounts on your DS 160? The qualification requirements haven't changed. The criteria that the visa officer is evaluating is the same as it always was. And the students that I work with are not telling me anything that wasn't true when I was conducting visa interviews myself. I will say that when you go in for your student visa interview, your officer is really thinking about three criteria, three questions. Number one, are you planning to study in the United States? Are you traveling to the US to enroll in a full course load, attend class, and graduate? Number two, can you afford the expense? And then number three, are you going to leave the United States after you graduate? And of course, after any authorized OPT or STEM OPT concludes. So that hasn't changed. And the questions that you should expect are going to be very much kind of tailored to those three criteria.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next one. Is F1 visa valid to re-enter the US until the exact expiration date? Or will we expect any issue entering the US if the visa is close to expiring, for example, expiring in 1 week?
No, I mean, generally speaking, this is just it's like a ticket that maybe gets you into a concert, right? As long as that visa has not expired, you can re-enter the United States. The caveat here is that you still need to be a student or at least on, student status. So you're still an active student, quote unquote, if you're doing post-completion OPT, for example. But if you're no longer a student, if you've graduated, you're done with your authorized OPT or STEM OPT, and your visa is still valid, you can't then re-enter the country on that F1 visa.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on. Question number three. This question is a little bit in general. This person wanted to know, are there any issues re-entering the US while on CPT? I think to determine what is re-entering the US, you can break it down to two parts. One is getting your F1 visa renewal, and then the other one is having an F1 visa but enter the US border with that F1 visa. But I think, Travis, you can. I think for today we might be focusing on the F1 visa interviews for today's topic, but please feel free to share anything you have in mind.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a very nuanced question, honestly, because it very much depends on your unique circumstances, right? But I think generally speaking, what I would say is remember the three criteria. Number three is, are you going to leave the United States when your, status, in this case, your CPT or OPT concludes? And so if you present yourself as somebody who's working primarily in the US, versus somebody who is a student primarily, but you're engaged in an OPT experience, as part of your studies, part of your educational program, those are two very different situations. If you're showing a CBP official that you're really using this visa just so you can work in the US, that can cause some, concerns. Maybe you're not really a student. Maybe you're not planning to leave when this program ends. You're going to continue working. So again, this is kind of a nuanced question. I think generally there's not a huge world of complications, but it does depend on your unique situation.
Absolutely. All right, next question will be a little bit specific, but I still think it's a good question worth us to discuss about. So, this person was on an F2 spouse visa before. Now he or she transitioned to an F1 through a change of status in the US and is ready to get into school right now. But can the person go back to home country, India, during the winter break for an F1 visa interview? I think there's no yes or no answer, but I think the person was looking more for like tips and recommendations.
Yeah, Ryan, I mean, you're right. There's no yes or no. I think the biggest question I would have right now is, will there be an interview appointment available for you? Again, we don't know really how many interview slots are being open. Yesterday, I understood that India, most of the consulates and the embassy has yet to reopen F1 interview appointments, though it should be happening in the next couple of days. So, my recommendation would be before you leave the United States, make sure you've got your interview scheduled. Everything is in place because I would hate for you to leave the country and then find that you've got a 6 month wait before you can get that F1 visa stamp and return. Otherwise, I would treat the interview like you always would, be prepared to talk about the school you're attending, etc.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on. Next question. Do second master students face more questions or risk at the visa interview now? I don't know if we have any information in terms of now, but as a former visa officer, what do you think about, interviewing those second master students?
This has and still is it's kind of always been a red flag for visa officers. By red flag, I don't mean that this is going to automatically disqualify you, but it will lead to additional questions. And you think about this as, and I'm telling you as my perspective as a former visa officer. I need to be sure that you are, again, you're using this visa to be a student. I want to know that you're going to enroll in class, you're going to attend class, you're going to graduate. If you already have a master's degree and you're telling me you need another master's degree, well, now I'm concerned that you're trying to get this visa for some other purpose. It's just your excuse to get into the country so maybe you can work and send money back home or something. Now, I'm not saying that's fair. I think that's very unfair. But what it does mean is that if you are planning to attain your second master's degree, you need to be very clear about why. Why have you decided to go back to school now? What will this specific degree unlock for your future? Why is this so important? How does this maybe fit into your previous education and career experience? And then, hopefully you'll be on a path to approval.
Absolutely. All right, moving on. Next one. Are there any new documents required for F1 visa interviews for now?
Nope, it's the same it's always been. And I should clarify something here. There was a YouTube video a couple of months ago that was 100% false, and it kind of went viral all over the internet. And it was telling students that they had to upload documents to where they fill out the DS-160 at least 72 hours before their interview. That is not true. There is no document upload requirement for an F1 visa. There's not even a way to upload documents. And then, during the interview, documents are never going to be the focus of an officer's evaluation of your qualifications. Instead, the officer wants to hear how you explain yourself. How do you introduce your plans, your situation at home, your justification to go to a certain school, attain a certain degree. They may ask to see a bank statement or your transcripts if you're a progressing student, but that is not going to be the focus of the interview. So the documents that I would recommend you bring haven't changed. And my advice to, not focus, not rely on documents similarly hasn't changed.
Right. For some of you that might came in midway of the sessions, so the recordings will be sent your way. So definitely feel free to rewatch some of the sessions that Travis presented to get as much information as you could. All right, I'll move on to the next question. Is there a simple way to renew my F1 visa while I'm still in the US?
So this is an interesting question. There's no way to renew an F1 visa while you're in the US, but remember, as long as you're maintaining your student status, you don't necessarily need a new F1 visa. Of course, you need a new F1 visa to enable you to leave the US and come back in. But if you're not planning to travel internationally, as long as you're maintaining your status, you should be okay.
Mhm.
But yeah, to get a new visa stamp, a new F1 visa, you have to go and apply at an embassy or consulate.
Absolutely. All right, moving on. Can we expect more flexibility in scheduling or rescheduling visa interviews?
You know, Unfortunately, I think it's the opposite. I expect less flexibility. There's a tremendous workload that is being placed on visa officers now to conduct this social media, this online presence review. And I think with more time put on the visa officers, more requirements that they have to go through, that means less time for them to conduct visa interviews. So I think time will tell. Nobody knows yet, but I'm a little bit concerned that it will actually be harder to schedule and even harder to reschedule a visa interview. Uh, if we want to be a little bit more proactive here, my advice to you is don't delay any step of the process. If you're planning to apply for your first student visa, as soon as you get your I-20 form, fill out your DS-160, submit it, schedule the earliest visa interview slot that you can find. Don't think that you can wait a few months. Maybe you just need an appointment a few weeks before the first day of class. Do it as early as possible because we do expect everything to take longer than it used to.
Absolutely. I think both question number 8 and number 9 are asking similar things. So we kind of have already discussed with Travis that we're
Mm-hmm.
not sure if India is opening back up, but we don't.
Well, they should be. They've been directed to open back up. We just don't know when. My assumption is that within the next literally couple of days, you should start seeing interview appointments open.
All right, absolutely. And I do want to ask a follow-up question from my side, actually. So with these kind of concerns that people from China, from India, it's hard to get visa interview slots because there's just so many students wanting to get in here. So people will automatically consider a third country. So could you share a little bit insight in terms of if I couldn't get something from India or China, I wanted to go to a third country, what do you recommend in that case?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, Ryan. I'm glad you brought that up. First of all, if you can't find an interview slot in time in your own country, I would urge you to try to apply for what's commonly called an emergency or an expedited interview appointment. In the website where you go to schedule your interview, there's an area to request an emergency appointment. And you would justify that request by saying, look, my classes begin on this date. I can't find an interview before then. And hopefully they will make a slot available to you. The problem is right now, given the additional workload placed on visa officers, we're not sure if that will still be an option. So then that leads you to what Ryan was alluding to, which is you simply can't schedule any time in your own country. Should you think about going somewhere else? And I would say yes. Look, if you can't get a visa in India, think about going to, I don't know, Hong Kong or Singapore or wherever you can. Probably would be best to prioritize a place you can go without another visa requirement. But what I will say is if you find that you're applying outside of your home country, you should expect some additional scrutiny at your interview. And it's purely psychological. So when I was interviewing visa applicants in Beijing, China, as an example, I was very accustomed to interacting with Chinese applicants. I knew how the Chinese passport looked. I was used to looking at Chinese bank statements, speaking Mandarin. But then if an applicant appeared at my window from India or Australia or Chile or wherever, my first thought was, why is this person here in Beijing? And so what I would recommend if you apply outside of your home country is start your interview with a very quick explanation of why you're there. It could be something as simple as, you may see that I'm from India. I'm here in Singapore because I couldn't find an interview appointment in time back at home. And just that little explanation should kind of, tamp down the concern that the visa officer has.
Absolutely. Next question, a question on a more realistic side. So can I enter the US on an F2 visa if my F1 visa interview got rejected?
So this is another question that you probably should reach out to an immigration lawyer to talk about because there's a lot of nuances. So I'm going to assume a lot of things here. I'm going to assume that you already had an F2 visa when you applied for an F1. Your F1 was then refused. And I'm also going to assume that your F2 visa was not canceled or revoked when your F1 visa was refused. So in other words, you still have a valid F2 visa. Technically, you should be able to re-enter the country on your F2 visa. However, you may encounter some pretty specific questions when you get to the border from the Customs and Border Protection official. So if you want to reach out to me, my email address was on the slide, info@zfvisa.com. I'd be happy to walk you through some considerations, but I would need to know much more about your situation first.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on. Next question, is renewing visa on day one CPT recommended? And if I have enrolled in day one CPT this year, my program ends in 2027. And my F1 visa expires somewhere between my study. So do you recommend going for visa renewal? If so, and when?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. My recommendation is if you can, it's nice to have a valid visa while you're in the United States. Because if you have to leave the country, you won't be able to come back and, go back to school or work or whatever your plan is until you renew the visa. Generally, I would say it's safer to renew your visa before you graduate. So your program ends in 2027, your visa expires in 2026. It's probably safest to reapply before it expires in 2026 or at least before you graduate. But the big caveat here is before you make any plans to leave the country and go through that process, make sure that you can schedule an interview. We don't know what kind of delays are going to be kind of, encountered here. And so again, I would hate for you to leave the country and then just find that you're stuck and you can't come back for a long time.
Travis, would you say that because of, the new rules and new changes happen regularly, would you recommend students to try to hold off just a little bit if they're on OPT, CPT, just to try to see what this will go until they leave the country?
That's a, it's a really good question and it's really hard to answer. I think, there's a lot of debate in the immigration law community about this exact topic. Um, I think, my feel here is if you can schedule a visa interview, I don't see a reason to wait. The reason to wait is, again, I don't want you to leave the United States only to find that the first available interview is in 2027, right? But if you can schedule an interview, I don't see that much has changed. As long as you're listing all of your social media accounts on your DS-160 form and you're not posting pictures of you smoking marijuana or snorting cocaine or something. Uh, there are other immigration attorneys that are taking a much more conservative approach and saying, don't leave the country. It's not worth it. I haven't gone that far, but I do think that with all of this, we're in somewhat unprecedented times here, and regulations, policies are changing almost by the hour right now. So I think above anything, I would just urge you to try to stay on top of this as it unfolds. Continue your relationship with Go Elite. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. Don't leave this stuff to chance. Don't just assume everything will be okay, because for all you know, an hour ago, a new policy was announced, and that's what makes this so difficult right now.
Absolutely. Great information from your side. Let's move on. Next one. What should students who are preparing for a green card or have already applied for a green card be careful of?
Mm. Great question. So remember, the third criteria that a student visa applicant needs to show is that they're going to leave the country after they graduate. And this is what we commonly refer to as having ties to home. It's basically, a compelling reason or maybe multiple compelling reasons that you're going to be kind of, urged to leave the United States. If you've applied for a green card or somebody has applied for a green card on your behalf, well, that's kind of evidence that you're planning to stay in the United States. You're planning to become a United States citizen. And so that can tend to erode your visa officer's conclusion that you're going to leave. So you have to be honest about the situation. The officer will know if you have a pending green card application in your name. So don't try to hide it. But if you do, I would urge you to note it if you're asked, be honest about it, and then try to redirect the interview to you as a student, not you as an immigrant. Be very clear about why this degree is so important to you. Be very clear about what you're planning to do after you graduate. And remember, you have to have plans outside of the country too. I think a lot of students, their ultimate dream is to graduate and find a job in the United States, maybe get an H-1B visa, ultimately maybe a green card. That's great. I totally support that. I would love for that to happen for you. But remember that the H-1B visa is part of a lottery system. You may not be selected. Your green card application may be denied. It may encounter some weird, hiccups along the way. So challenge yourself to think about what would you do if there was no opportunity for you in the United States? Where would you like to work? What would you like to do? How will this degree unlock those opportunities for you? That's what you should explain in your interview.
Absolutely. Well put. All right. Next one, I think a follow-up, a little bit follow-up on the green card side of things. So, does having an approved I-140 indicate immigration intent? And will we have to check yes for the questions on DX-160, which is have you filed for an immigration application?
Yes and yes. And it's basically the same question we were talking about. It's not an automatic disqualification, though it would be if you weren't honest about it. So you have to note that, yes, this was filed, and then just be prepared to explain your plans.
Mhm. Next one, very similar questions with I-140. So if you are somebody who is currently in this situation and you have to travel back, I do encourage you to send an email to Travis to get connected so that he can know more about your situations. But we wouldn't discuss this one repeatedly. We will move on with next question. So is renewing visa at my home country in Asia better than a nearby country such as Canada? I wouldn't say better or worse is the right word to put it, but give people like a general picture of like renewing visa in home country versus renewing visa in Canada. I think we talked about this slightly before also.
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand why you would want to go to Canada to renew your visa. It's closer, it's cheaper than flying all the way back to Asia, et cetera. But it's not without risks. So first of all, you're applying in a different country, and that raises additional concerns like we talked about. But beyond that, the bigger risk is that you are delayed. So there's always a chance for administrative processing. Remember, it's like your visa officer's pushing pause on your application because maybe they need to ask you for more documents or they need to review something or it could be anything. And so you should plan for a delay in the process. And if you go to a third country like Canada or Mexico, it could be problematic if you have to spend several weeks there before your visa is approved and you can go home. If you go back to your home in Asia, at least you're at home if you encounter this delay. You're around your family, your friends. You might be able to kind of, continue living your life a little bit easier. So I think that's the biggest risk that I would consider when if I was thinking about going to Canada.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on. Next question. Uh, Earlier, many agents used to help students to get visa interviews, visa appointments, and this is pretty common, I think, a lot of countries too. So if my appointment was booked by an agent, by a consultancy, could that cause any problems during the visa process, especially now?
It could. This is very common, but there has been kind of a crackdown on agents scheduling visa interviews. Not in every situation, but I'm sure most people on this call are aware of the just ballooning wait times, especially in India last year to schedule a visa interview. We saw, I think Mumbai was an example. It was something like 580 days before a new interview could be scheduled. And one of the big reasons behind that is there were agents that were buying up blocks of interviews and then reselling them to applicants. And so the State Department, did not look favorably on that action because it was really causing a lot of problems for everybody else. So, there is a chance that when you schedule something through an agent, there could be an issue. There's been a number of things that the State Department has done since last summer to crack down on this, where they're making sure that details that were entered when the interview was scheduled match the details on your DS-160, like your passport number, for example. There's less of an ability to update those details if they don't match, and if they don't match, you can't come in for the interview. So yeah, there could be some complications, but again, not in every situation. It depends on how the interview was scheduled.
Mhm. All right. Next questions. This person also have a specific questions regarding day one CPT. All right, let's. I think a lot of people on this call are also trying to get more information around the subject of day one CPT. So, is it safe for me, especially now, to travel outside of US and come back under the new visa laws? I'm assuming that this person doesn't have an F1 visa renewed yet. So going for an F1 visa under day one CPT, do you think this is a good timing right now?
Nothing has changed specifically for day one CPT programs. I'm not aware that there's any additional scrutiny that's been placed on day one CPT schools, day one CPT students. It really is just social media review. So assuming that, again, your social media, your online presence isn't scary or problematic, I'm not sure that it's really any different than it was 6 months ago. The biggest issue again is, can you schedule that visa interview if you need to schedule it? And then when you travel back to the United States, it it's it sounds strange to say this, but it's largely business as usual. I was in South Korea a couple weeks ago speaking at an immigration law conference, and when I came back, I took a look at where foreign citizens entered the country, and I saw hundreds, if not thousands, going through the checkpoint. It really did look like it always looked.
Mhm.
And so I'm not sure that I have specific concerns right now, aside from if you need a new visa, make sure you can schedule an interview.
Mhm. I think another point that Travis you brought up, I wanted to keep emphasizing just a little bit. Is just that if you
Mhm.
wanted to travel under day one CPT right now, which you have a current job that you're juggling with studying and then working at the same time, another thing to consider is that what if you are put onto a hold of administrative processing and you don't have an estimated time to come back as quickly as you wish to? And what if you are put on hold and then it takes you extra month to get over that? Even if you're approved in the end, how could that work with your school and then also with your employer? So this is something I would consider.
Mhm.
I would never recommend students to travel like during the semester, but even if you wanted to travel during a holiday, I still recommend you to do as much research as you could, or maybe even speak with an expert like Travis to get more help, more information before you actually go and book that visa interview, assuming that you could get that interview slot.
I agree. And by the way, Ryan, I'm not sure that many people are aware of this, but I often say, I totally agree. Don't plan on doing this during a semester because you may be delayed. Summer is usually the best time. Earlier in the summer is best because you're not part of kind of the mad rush when all the students come in. But then the other option would be over the kind of Christmas, New Year holiday season. The problem here is that many consulates and embassies they'll operate on a limited staff because a lot of people are taking holidays during that time. And so if you are subjected to delays, let's say your interview's on, December 21st, if you're subjected to administrative processing delays, those delays could take much longer because there's fewer people actually working at the embassy during that holiday season. So I do think that, if you're thinking ahead proactively, early summer, like May or June, uh, even early July, that's usually the best time to do it. But like Ryan said, reach out to us. We'll give you some advice for your specific situation.
Absolutely. And due to the timing sake, we only have 1 minute left. So I want to quickly run through maybe the last questions we can. And then I
Mhm.
noticed that we do have a couple more we haven't got into. So please feel free, everyone, please feel free to scan the QR code. We can connect you with Travis, or if you have concerns with Day One CPT, hopefully we can answer them for you as well. So let's do the last questions. So thank you so much, Travis, for the workshop. I'm a PhD candidate in STEM field. And do you have any suggestions on how students with a rather sensitive major background can convince the officer to get the F1 visa?
Yeah, excellent question. So this is where I want to give you two pieces of insight. Number one is if you are subjected to administrative processing because of your sensitive research or sensitive background, there's no way to avoid that. Don't try to avoid it because just trying to avoid that can raise other complications. Instead, I want you to come to your interview prepared with a couple of documents. Number one, your detailed resume or CV. Number two, a list of any academic publications that have been published in your name. Number three, a research or study plan that explains in simple English what you're doing in the US. Number four, your advisor's CV, if you have a research advisor. And then number five, a list of your advisor's publications, if you have a research advisor. Bringing those documents will minimize the delay that you expect because that's what your visa officer will ask you for. If you don't bring those documents with you to the interview and they ask you for them, you have to go home, you have to email them in, they have to be reviewed, then the process begins, and now you've added a couple more weeks of delay. So again, you cannot avoid this type of administrative processing review. It's unfortunately just part of the process, but coming prepared can minimize the delay that you expect.
All right. Thank you so much, Travis. This is a wonderful answer, and we're coming to an end of today's webinar. I wish we had more time to deal with all questions, but thank you everyone for attending and asking those wonderful questions. If sometimes your situation can be a little bit complicated and specific, I do recommend you to consult with Travis directly. And then you can always feel free to send him an email. You can find his email address in the recordings that we are delivered to you. And also you can scan the QR code so we can connect you directly with him as well. And then I want to thank you, Travis, for another wonderful presentation. Hopefully we will have you back soon with us for another session as well. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, everybody, for
Thanks,
coming.
Ryan.
Thank you. Have a great night, everybody. Have a great morning from wherever you are. Thank you. Bye bye.